Hello, everyone. Hello. Now, it's pretty hard to believe that we have Jay McInerney here. I know you're all such fans, and when I read his first novel, it really made me move to this city. And I think so many of us may be in New York for the same reasons. It kind of inspired some. I was just saying to Jay earlier, maybe like the little devil in us who wanted to come and play here. But I'll just introduce him formally. He's the author of 8 books, including the cult sensation Bright Lights, Big City, that influenced generations to move to New York. He's also written a collection of short stories and 3 collections of essays on wine, and he's currently the wine critic for the Wall Street Journal. But tonight we're here to talk about his most recent novel, Bright Precious Days. And in it we get to revisit Russell and Corinne Calloway, a couple that he first introduced to us in Brightness Falls and then again in The Good Life. I don't want to keep talking because I feel like he's here. But welcome to Lit Up at Soho House, Jay.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here. I'm actually a member here. So.
I feel like this table is in a very strange position. Is it? I think I want to move it. Anyway, it's fine. I just feel like
Where do you want to move it?
divided.
Oh, I see. Okay.
We're divided.
We'll move it behind us.
There we
okay.
go. That's much better. Okay.
I should say because Hearst will probably get upset if I don't mention that it's actually I am now the wine critic for Town and Country magazine.
Oh, excellent.
I was at the Wall Street Journal for 5 years before.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to talk about your wine writing in a minute, but I have my segue planned for that. Okay, we're here tonight and the Democratic Convention is happening. And in this new novel, Corinne and Russell, it all kind of happens in the year before the 2008 crash, the financial crash, and the historic election of President Obama. What do you think Corinne and Russell would think of this election? Who would they vote for?
Well, I can tell you exactly who they'd vote for. And,
Perfect.
And it's not Donald Trump. This novel actually kind of came together in my mind probably about three years ago. I was just looking back on the period of the financial crisis and the 2008 election. And the image that started this book was an image of these friends sitting around a loft in Tribeca watching the election returns. And, in retrospect, it was a pretty amazing time because on the one hand, you have the world financial system was virtually melting down, and certainly the American economy was in peril. And yet, for a certainly for most of my characters, a certain class of New Yorkers, the election of Obama and even the possibility of Obama's election was an incredibly optimistic and hopeful moment. And so that was the single image that this book started with. Bunch of New Yorkers sitting around a Tribeca loft, old school loft, with this sort of floor that had gaps and, this sort of patched tin ceilings. I'm not talking about one of those new kind of lofts with the doormen and the swimming pools, but they've been there for about 20 years now. And part of the plot of the book reflects their desperate attempt to remain in Manhattan and not get kicked off the island, as it were. But that was where I started.
And where were you on the election on that night?
I was in my apartment in Greenwich Village, and I can't remember why. My wife was out of town, and but I remember that I had to go up to Times Square because I was doing some sort of commentary for the BBC was broadcasting live out of some building in Times Square, and so I went up to pretend that I had something interesting to say to the British television viewing public about the elections, and then from there, it would have been about 9 o'clock, I think, and I was broadcasting, and 8 o'clock maybe. Then I went down to the Spotted Pig.
Which has another name in the book.
Yeah,
what is it?
True.
The Fatted Calf?
It's true.
I was like, I know where that is.
It's true that the book, the Spotted Pig definitely appears in the book, but for some reason I changed the name. I mean, I don't know. I'm friends with Ken Friedman and April Bloomfield, and I thought if there was something I said that was offensive to them, it was better if I did
Switched it.
if I just had a different name. I mean, I guess in the book I do sort of slightly lampoon how trendy the Spotted Pig is. So that was one reason I changed the name. But anyway, I went to the Spotted Pig, and I just had dinner by myself, and I think they actually had a TV going, and then I went home and started watching at home, and about I guess it must have been announced about 10:30, 11 o'clock, and it was really interesting being in the Village because I heard a lot of cheering in the streets and people. There was a lot of milling and celebrating in the streets, and to me, it was a really interesting moment for somebody who writes about New York, because the last time I remember people sort of gathering in the street to register some major public event, it was right after September 11th, and it was a very sad and catastrophic event. And this seemed like kind of almost a reversal, kind of a vindication, especially since we went to war with sort of under false pretenses of avenging 9/11. And looking back from the vantage point of 2012-13, which is really when I started to think about this book, it was also sort of poignant because nobody could have possibly lived up to the hope and optimism that Obama's election fomented among, some of us, some of these characters that I write about. So looking back on election night 2008 from the vantage point of 2016, it's a little it's a little poignant, it's a little sad,
nostalgic, because
the world, he didn't solve all the problems, and of course I'm not sure anybody could have.
And when did you first imagine this couple? I read that they came to you very soon after the publication of Bright Lights, Big City. Did they come to you as one, and you go, there's the perfect couple? We all have them in our circle of friends, almost.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that was sort of the image I started with. These characters first appeared in the first story that I wrote after publishing Bright Lights, Big City, and I think we all do have it, particularly when you're in your 20s, say, or there's that couple that are the first to sort of pair off and get married and like have cocktail parties, and in this case, they were sort of college sweethearts at Brown University, and they moved to New York, as many of their friends did, and they actually they had a 1-bedroom rental on the Upper East Side, and they were having cocktail parties when everybody else was sort of having beers in the East Village, so on the one hand I love this idea of that the perfect couple, and on the other hand, of course, there's no such thing as a perfect couple, and to even say that about any two people is sort of a death sentence, I guess somebody will have an affair the next day, which is of course.
Which happens a bit.
Which is, of course, what happens in all three books. But the other thing was, if I hadn't published Bright Lights, Big City, and if I hadn't succeeded in some sense as a novelist, I think that what I would have done was become an editor. And so Russell Calloway is an editor. He works for a literary publishing house. And so for me, he was kind of the life not lived. And if I had managed to marry and stay married to my college sweetheart, then his life might have been my life. And so Philip Roth has this wonderful expression, the counter life, And so for me, Russell is the road not quite taken, but it's sort of like a parallel. He's living a parallel life to mine.
Do you have
also he's more of an everyman than I mean, if I want to write about sort of representative characters, I don't know. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to spend the rest of my life writing about a relatively successful published novelist. It's not really that representative an experience.
Well, and that's hard because I'm sure so much of your experience has been defined by having this big success early on. I loved, there's an amazing Paris review, the big interview that I feel like every writer gets in their life, and then it's almost like, I don't know, it's like you're still alive.
Now I know, but now I should get hit by a cab outside.
Because it's happened. But in it, I was really interested to hear about your experience in Japan. It was something I'd never heard of in any... I know you've written a book that touches on maybe, that part of your life. But can you talk a little bit about the drive to be a writer so young? And this, did you go to Japan to write the great expatriate novel?
Yeah, when I graduated from Williams, I actually started out trying to get a newspaper job, and Woodward and Bernstein had just made that virtually impossible because they had made journalism the most popular profession in America after All the President's Men and so on. And there aren't that many newspaper jobs. I had to unlist my phone number, but before I did, I would get calls in the middle of the night, people asking me where is the Lizard Lounge, which was a place I made up. But
that's great.
But I don't know. I think it's I think it's sad and it's funny, and I think that I think without the humor, the book would be kind of intolerable.
Mm. And when did you meet Raymond Carver? And would you say that he was your mentor versus someone like George Plimpton?
Yes, actually, not long after these events, I was unemployed. I was home in my apartment in the Village. This is when this is when a unemployed aspiring writer could still live in Manhattan, could still afford rent in a one-bedroom apartment. But I was awakened by a phone call from my friend Gary Fiskajon, the one who worked at Random House, and he said, "We have Raymond." I just had lunch with Raymond Carver, and I thought he was joking, and I hung up on him, and he called me back, and he said, "No." He said, "I just had lunch with Raymond Carver and his editor Gordon Lish. And he has nowhere to go before his reading up at Columbia, and we have to go back to the office." And he said, I sent him down to your apartment. And Gary Fiskajon knew that I loved Raymond Carver's work because we had exchanged his books when we were in college, and we had idolized him. And so sure enough, the doorbell, the buzzer rang, and it was Raymond Carver, and he showed this big bear of a man, very soft-spoken, sort of really gentle kind of giant. He had actually recently quit drinking when I met him, which made him seem even more fragile. But we ended up talking for quite a few hours at the apartment before we suddenly realized that he was late for his reading, and I rushed him up to Columbia. And he subsequently wrote me a letter, stayed in touch, and he could see that my life in New York was not very conducive to becoming a great writer. For instance, the fact that I was waking up at 1:30 in the afternoon and clearly not writing. And he invited me to come study with him at Syracuse University, where he was teaching creative writing. Happily enough for me, he was also the other guy up there was Tobias Wolff, another seriously great writer, and basically I had nothing left to my New York dream had completely unraveled and fallen apart, and also it turned out that living in Manhattan was in some ways interfering with my desire to apprentice myself to my craft, because I was sort of going out to clubs and staying up all night, and not
Well, and
really.
is that why you were late to his reading?
Yes, I was late. We were late to his reading because I decided to break the ice by breaking out some cocaine and sharing it with him, and that's why we were still talking 5 hours later when we realized
Animatedly.
we realized that he was late for his reading.
Oh my
he,
God.
he read very fast that night.
I have an amazing quote here that you were on a wine podcast, and this is what you said. Vodka and cocaine don't teach you much in the long run, but wine is an endless subject, and it's a way of intellectualizing my hedonism. I think that's kind of should be on T-shirts or something. It's incredible.
Well, it's true that eventually, I sort of switched over to wine, and I kind of immersed myself in the subject. Strangely enough, when I was at Syracuse, I got a job at a wine store. I mean, when I say wine store, don't raise your expectations too high, because most of our customers were like homeless guys who would scrape together like nickels and pennies and push them across the counter, and they would buy things like Wild Irish Rose and MD 2020, but still there was a library of wine books in this wine store, and then I would sort of take home a bottle at night to sample it, and that was the tradition among the clerks, and that was kind of where my interest started to develop, and I wrote Bright Lights while I was working at that wine store, and so when I actually got the call that the novel was being published at the wine store, because my friend, future editor Gary Fisketjon, knew that I was working there at that time, and he called me up to say that the novel had been accepted. So one of the first things I did was to actually buy one of the few. There was a section of good stuff. It wasn't very big, and the bottles were pretty dusty, but I bought the best Bordeaux they had in the store that night and took it home. And so the wine and the...
It does seem intertwined. Even, in these novels, it's almost... you definitely get a sense of, as the characters grow up, so too do their kind of wine taste. They develop... in many ways, kind of, I'm sure, like you did. But I'm really interested because I think, all that pressure, having written this novel, and then was writing about wine kind of a release, a relief to be able to just get 1,200 words done.
Yeah. It's hard writing fiction, and sometimes I just feel as if I can't. And it's a great relief to... write about a subject that you just love and something that you're still learning about, and something that inspires your passion. I try to write about wine like a novelist. I try to use metaphor and simile and to tell and to sort of make characters out of the people who make wine. But it's a great relief sometimes to just sort of say, you know what, I can't get the novel going today. I think I'll write my wine column instead.
And who gave you your first kind of wine writing assignment? I did do some research, and I read that one editor was very reluctant to give you the job because she thought your nose might not work too well. Sorry to bring that up.
No, it's true. Yeah, she did. She was well. The food editor of House and Garden was outraged when she heard that I was being considered as a wine writer. A friend of mine who was once at Esquire and then Newsweek eventually became the editor-in-chief of House and Garden, and she thought it would be. This is 1997. And she felt that the people who were interested in, gardening and the good life would be interested in wine, and she knew that I was, because she had been a guest at my home. She knew that I had this great interest in wine, and she called me and asked me if I would consider writing a wine column, which I was very surprised by, and I just said, I don't feel that I know enough about it. I'm not an expert. And she said, well, I've been reading what wine writing there is out there, and she said it's mostly really boring and technical, and she said, why don't you just give it a shot and admit when you don't know something, but try and make it fun. So I
think
I
you
agreed to
used
do it for
characters.
6 months,
Yeah.
and it kind of stuck with me.
What are some of the metaphors you've used? Because you're drinking a Chablis tonight, and I heard that you described Chablis as Cape Moss, a Cape Moss wine.
Well, yeah, that was one of my earliest columns. It was, this would have been like 97. And you have to think back to the time when Pamela Anderson was actually a current figure. But I was writing about the difference between California Chardonnay and French Burgundy, including Chablis, and I was struggling with all these, trying to describe the flavors, and in a lot of wine criticism they say, oh, it's citrusy, it's mineral, it's floral. They pile on a lot of descriptive adjectives, many of which seem to clash with each other, I think, and so this was one of my first columns, and I was just trying to figure out how the hell do you describe the taste of a wine, and then I thought, well, metaphor might be better than some sort of attempt to describe the flavors. And so I compared the Chablis that I was trying to describe to Cape Moss, because it was kind of lean, and it was kind of angular, I guess. And I compared the typical California Chardonnay to Pamela Anderson. Yeah, I think if you, I don't know, it seemed to, people seemed to...
It seemed to resonate.
To get what I was talking about. And, I think that I compare, I compare wines to like cars, movies, actresses.
Songs.
And songs. But I think sometimes that evokes the experience more... in a more interesting way than saying, oh, this is mocha and cherry and and tobacco. You read some of these wine descriptions, and they're, I don't know, you think, like, can it really taste like all those things at once?
Well, sometimes wine seems like a kind of an elite thing, but I think you go and meet the winemakers a lot. I loved, you've said that you don't want to be that type of writer who's sitting in a fancy New York restaurant trying the wines that way and making decisions about them.
Yeah, I like to go and visit the people and see the vineyards and see their homes. And it's interesting, in the old world, most of these people are like dealing with, the new generation, be in a rock band or like stay with this sort of 300-year-old thing that's been in their family. Whereas the new world story in California and Oregon and so on is almost the reverse. It's like somebody was in a rock band and became famous, or started a car parts company, or was hugely successful in one area of life, and then decides to pursue their passion, which is wine. And so you have a lot of really interesting characters in the wine world, and I think as a novelist, that's something that I enjoy. I enjoy trying to write character studies of these very interesting individuals.
I mean,
sometimes I'll choose the good story over the best wine, because...
comparing the wine world, you have all these worlds and probably so many more in New York that you've become a part of, because you became a part of the culture, essentially. How do they compare? How does the literary world compare to the food and wine world? Are people nicer in one or the other, or how have they changed?
Well, it is nice to have another world besides the literary world, because the literary world is a little bit competitive and bitchy. And when I say a little bit, I think I'm understating by a significant factor. But it's people in food and wine, they're but in wine world they live in beautiful places. They travel a lot. They're well fed. They're half buzzed. And there's a generosity and inclusiveness of spirit in the food and wine world, which I enjoy. I mean, chefs and sous chefs and people in the restaurant world tend to be, they tend to support each other in a way that I find enviable. And so to be a part of that world, I sometimes find a bit of a relief from. Relief from literary competition. But I want to be clear. I mean, my main job in the world is writing fiction and writing novels, and that's the one thing that gives me the most satisfaction in life. And I don't ever want to stop. But the wine writing is a nice hobby.
Well, segueing back into the novels, this novel and the trilogy, they deal with a marriage. And yes, other people come in and disrupt that marriage too. Something I found very interesting, there's an investment banker in the novels who, can we say, is, comes back, Luke, and you said that, in our culture, or maybe writers don't write about people in finance that much. It's almost like they hold so much power and yet they're not really in... I don't read many novels about them, but it's important that we do analyze them. And in this case, you're like, he's not that bad of a guy.
Well, I started this series back in 1992, and the image that I started with the first novel, which is Brightness Falls, was I was standing on Fifth Avenue, went across the street, and I looked across the street and I saw Ron Perlman, this billionaire, who I recognized because he'd been on the cover of some magazine, and a homeless guy with a bag of cans was kind of standing next to him. And Perlman, of course, had a couple of bodyguards, but I suddenly thought, you know what, I want to write a novel that has the homeless guy and the billionaire in it. And eventually, I used Russell and Corinne, who are sort of, these sort of middle class characters, to kind of tie the novel together. But I think that, but the homeless guy and the billionaire are characters in Brightness Falls. But I think that too often, those of us who live in the world of art and culture don't consider how as New Yorkers, how much we are bound up with the fate of these people down on Wall Street. Actually, a lot of them are in Midtown now, but and how much of our cultural apparatus is fed by these rivers of money that come from Wall Street. Imagine the art world and the symphony and the ballet and also the 6,000 or 7,000 restaurants in this within 4 or 5 miles of here without this sort of supply of money. So I think that it behooves us to look at these people and try and figure out who they are. And Luke McGavick, who you just mentioned, is a guy who he was an investment banker who retired at the age of 49 to try and find some meaning in his life. But he's a very wealthy guy who wants to find the next chapter in his life. And he's not a villain.
No, not at all.
I don't, I think there's a tendency in, there's a tendency in intellectual circles to sort of demonize people like that. Many of them are indeed terrible people, but not necessarily.
I mean, just earlier we were talking about this moment. I'm 35, and it seems like a division happens within friends as people, money becomes a divider of where you can go to dinner, what wine you order. whether it's embarrassing to order the expensive wine. Things start to become kind of far more heady than they were before. And you capture this in the books. And you said that there is a point where your decisions to follow your passions kind of either limit you or not.
Yeah,
How did you find that? I mean, your passions have led you to great, opening of life.
Well, I'm lucky because following my passions worked out well for me, and I was able to make a career out of the thing that I love the most. But I don't think that's necessarily typical. And on the other hand, Russell Calloway, my alter ego in these books, he follows his passion too, which is he loves literature and he publishes books. But one of the things that especially this new book is about is the fact that decisions that you make when you're in your 20s, you don't always consider the ramifications. And what Russell is struggling with in this book is that he chose a profession which is which was designed never to make him terribly wealthy, and he has 2 kids, and Manhattan has become incredibly expensive. So one of the main themes of this book is the struggle to reconcile your passion with the realities of the economic realities of life. Both Russell and Corrine works for a nonprofit organization, really believe in what they're doing, but they sometimes feel guilty, that they can't necessarily afford to send their kids to the best private schools because of the career choices that they've made and because of the incredible gentrification of Manhattan and the explosion of Manhattan real estate prices. And these are things that they wouldn't have guessed in their 20s. Everything, sleeping on somebody's couch is no big deal when you're young, But if you suddenly later in life are forced to sleep on somebody's couch, you sort of wonder about some of the decisions you've made.
I know we have to wrap up in a minute, but I have one more question, because the novel is about monogamy, fidelity, what makes a marriage. And I think, Corinne, there's a line which I'll butcher, but it's somewhere. It's about the secrets you have within a marriage, and almost what are the limits to those secrets. And as someone who's been married 4 times, correct, and is happily married the 4th time, I'm sure. What?
Yes. I got it right eventually, but I'm an optimist.
No, but that's what I love. I love that you want to get married, and I mean, what are the secrets? Like, what do you learn over the years? I know it's almost like an Oprah question, and it'll be up like Jay's 5 secrets to a secret. I
certainly don't have any secrets in that regard. Many people would consider me a terrible failure when it comes to marriage. but I obviously I'm a romantic because I keep trying, and I think that one of the reasons I'm so fascinated with this couple that I created was because I think monogamy is a fascinating and a difficult enterprise, and marriage, and particularly in contemporary Manhattan, I think is wow, what a challenge. And I haven't been entirely successful in this regard, and so I'm like kind of working out my fantasies through these people of like, a marriage that has actually managed to survive for, I guess it'll be about 27 or 28 years with the new book. And, they're somehow succeeding at monogamy, although just barely. And I find it fascinating.
No, me too. Well, I would love to open it up. Do we have any questions? I'm sure we do.
You don't have to.
Come on, guys. Oh, yeah, there's one up the back.
Yes.
So what's your writing process? Do you wake up and write? Do you have a special place you go to write? Do you give yourself a certain amount of pages every week that you're going to write?
I try to get to work shortly after I wake up. I mean, that's not that early, but I try to be at my desk by 9:30 or 10, and I don't wake up too much earlier than that. But I find that if I don't get working in the morning, that somehow it gets away from me, and I can't really start in the afternoon. I don't know why. I still have this residual puritanical notion that the early bird gets the worm, even though 9:30 is not that early. But I have an office I have a room that I call an office in my New York apartment. And finishing a novel, I leave Manhattan because I just find it too distracting. And I used to borrow friends' houses in the country. I'd borrow a friend's house in Vermont or in Rhode Island or in the East End of Long Island, and now I actually have a house in the East End of Long Island, so I can go there. But or I would go to Yaddo, the writers' colony. At the beginning and at the end, I just find that I have to sort of block out the world and work for long periods of time. In the middle of a novel, you can sort of coast a little more, and I go out to dinner and I socialize and so on. But especially at the end, I block everything out, and I don't sleep much, and I write for many long hours. But on a normal day, when I'm writing a short story or when I'm just in the middle of a book, I try to set myself a goal of 1,000 words, which seems pretty realistic usually. That's about 4 typed pages. And I feel really lucky and smart if I do more than that. And I get a little depressed if I do less, but I make myself sit for at least 3 hours. I never because I think sometimes if you're not at your desk, it won't happen. If you're walking around the neighborhood, buying coffee and picking up your dry cleaning, then it won't happen. You have to actually be at the desk.
I have one, and then we have another one here that I wanted to ask you, and it's like the dorkiest question ever. But it's like, what was the best party you ever went to?
I think the answer is that I don't remember.
Oh, I don't believe you. Was it your book party, or is that too stressful and crazy?
Well, one of the nicest parties that I went to personally, or one of the nicest parties that I had was with the first the book party for Bright Lights Big City took place in a nightclub called Area, which was one of the greatest nightclubs of all time. And this friend of mine knew the owner of Area, and he said, I could get you a party there. And this was before the era of like party promoters and sponsored parties. So we managed to talk the Eric Good, who owned Area at the time, into giving me a book party. And it was kind of amazing because some really interesting people came. Norman Mailer came. Boy George came. He was a very big figure at that time. Sting showed up for reasons I still don't understand. Matt Dillon, the actor, showed up. And it was a lot of just crazy kind of club kids, sort of dressed and painted in very colorful ways. And somehow, word was sort of getting out about this book that was set in downtown New York, and really, I had no idea who was going to show up, and it was quite extraordinary to have these people coming up to me and congratulating me, and people that were famous.
What time did it start? Was there dancing?
I don't know.
I'm just trying to imagine.
Probably started about 10 or 11 at night. I don't know.
Right.
I mean, nothing really started before then, and I mean, I don't think club life starts any earlier now.
No, but that's a pretty great book party, though.
You go home and take a nap, which we used to call a disco nap, after dinner, and then you go, and then you would go
head
out. Yeah.
There was one question right here.
Rick James came also, if you know Rick James.
Oh my God.
He was a character.
I still call it disco now.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. I mean, it was a little overwhelming what happened when I published Bright Lights, Big City. It was a little disorienting. I mean, I was just hoping to get a teaching job somewhere. You know, I mean, I didn't have any great expectations, and Random House only printed 5,000 copies, and it was a paperback, and I hoped I'd get some good reviews. You know, I hoped I'd get I don't know, a journalism job or a teaching job out of it, and suddenly things were, suddenly the movie rights. There was a bidding war for the movie rights before the book came out, and people were seeking me out, people that I had, been reading about for half of my life, and it was pretty overwhelming, and I don't think it was entirely healthy for my psyche to be, to go from like 0 to 120 miles per hour in the space of a few months. But I like to think I learned a lot about the culture by being sort of processed by the great American dream machine, being flown to Hollywood, being interviewed on the Today Show, having myself commodified, as it were, by the press. I think I learned something about how the culture worked. Probably wasn't very good for my second marriage, though, and for my personal development. But on the other hand, it's I feel really lucky because of the success of my first book allowed me to just pursue a writing career and to do what I loved for the next 25 years, 30 years, I guess. So I have to be grateful for that.
I think. Oh yes, one right here.
Do you think the publishing model is broken from the perspective of incentivizing new creative writing?
Well, it's funny. When I published Bright Lights, Big City, my then publisher, Jason Epstein, who I mentioned earlier, he took me out to lunch. This was in '84, and he said, you've written a good book here, and we're going to do the best we can, but people your age don't read. The novel's dead. Television and movies have wiped out our audience. So he said, so don't expect much. And subsequently, Bright Lights went on to sort of challenge that conventional wisdom, and then Bret Easton Ellis came along, and a lot of other people. I mean, so just when the novel was supposed to be dead, we sort of jump-started this mini revival, and then Tom Wolfe had been one of the people declaring the novel dead for many, many years, and then he wrote Bonfire of the Vanities, which broke all kinds of records, and it became part of the cultural conversation, and it seems to me that publishing has been in crisis for many, 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 many years, and yet somehow it keeps on. Just look at this past year. As people who live in New York who care about fiction, you have City on Fire. Really big, ambitious literary novel that reaches a pretty wide audience. You have Stephanie Danler's Sweet Bitter. Great coming of age novel about coming to New York and finding your way, and books like these, they keep connecting somehow with audiences. And I remember the last time I went to this thing called the American Booksellers Association Convention or something in Chicago. I forget exactly what it's called, but the last time I had been was 10 years ago, and I went this past spring. And I remember 10 years ago, everybody was pretty gloomy and thought that the internet was going to kill publishing, and ebooks were a disaster, and everybody was depressed. And this year, it seemed like all the booksellers are really upbeat and happy, and apparently sales are up. And I have to say, I'm not an expert on the industry, but but it seems to me that for my entire career, everybody's been saying that publishing is dying and the readers are disappearing, and yet it seems like we're still going pretty strong. And just as a reader, I feel like, there's always new writers coming along that I care about, and there's always quite aside from the classics that I haven't gotten around to reading yet, but I feel like publishing is strangely healthy, or it's surviving in a way that no one would have predicted 10 years ago. Look, this may be the last gasp. I don't know, but compared to what happened to songwriters, I think we're still hanging in there. The music industry has really, the model has completely been destroyed, and I think the publishing, this outdated model, still seems to be limping along okay.
Oh, one more, and then I think we'll have to wrap up.
Sort of as a follow-up to your question, I work for the New Republic, and our readers are voracious consumers of books and spend a lot of money on books. And I'm just curious if you have a preference for how people consume your books. Do you prefer e-readers?
Of course I have a preference. I make a lot more money on real books. The theory that what your publisher tells you is that people will buy more ebooks, and therefore you shouldn't mind getting a lot less money for the ebook. I personally don't quite understand how they have no production costs or anything. How come I get so much less money for the ebook? But as a reader, I prefer. I'm very old-fashioned. I like a real book. I mean, it wasn't easy carrying City on Fire around, but I did. It weighs about 18 pounds. But I like something. I like consuming books that way. I also collect books. So the book as a physical object still has real resonance for me. And yet, I think that anything that does encourage more reading and more consumption of novels is good. So I'm certainly not against ebooks.
Thank you so much.